Everyone, it is noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll hand it off to Evelyn Nelson to welcome us and give us a few housekeeping items.
Super, great to see everybody. I love that first slide with the markers. I always feel like I should have a big sign behind me where I could write welcome, but we're really glad to have you here today. I'm the PI for the Telehealth Rocks program. It's a federally funded program where we're looking at pairing both education, just like today, and our telehealth clinical services for children and young people in Kansas. Just a few house cleaning items as we're getting going. Your microphones have been muted, but please do unmute and use the chat to ask questions and share comments. We love it when you keep your cameras on. It's a-okay if you're also eating lunch. That's great. Make sure you do type in your first and last names. I believe everyone in the call has done that. That just really helps us know how to contact you with your certificates of attendance, which will be shared afterwards as well as the videos. And then with that, I'll hand it off to our wonderful presenters today.
Hey, thanks so much, Evelyn. Glad that, I can't believe it's been a month already since we met last time. I'm glad that you all have been able to join today. So presenting, you just met Dr. Evelyn Nelson. I'm Stephanie, you can call me Steph, and Melissa Morris. And then our coaching team includes Mariana and James, and they're also here. Feel free to wave if you're here. I can't see you in all the different tiles of human faces. But yeah, so we kind of, in terms of even though we're only seeing you visually about once a month, behind the scenes, we all are connecting with all of you to try to help kind of, just whether it be through one-on-one coaching or whether it be through the Facebook groups, whether it be through emails, to help support you just kind of in this journey of trying to adapt different tools and strategies for yourselves and for classrooms. Next slide, please. So our hopes for today, we want to, it's kind of hard in the virtual format, but want to just take this time to kind of check in with yourself. You made it here today. I know you all are probably busy during your lunchtime and multitasking, which we totally hear you. But just, maybe if you can take a brief couple seconds just of yourself to check in and see, how the past month go. I think last month when we met, you all made mention that, that you felt overwhelmed or stressed or tired, and just maybe thinking back on a month ago, have things changed? Are there things that you wish you're doing more of, less of? Just how are you in this moment right now? It's okay if your answer is hungry too. So our hopes for today, not only to have this be a time to check in with yourself, but also to discuss, key features. We know you already know about this, and you already do a really good job because you're here and in the roles that you are, but just to discuss more about, what keeps a safe and supportive environment for well-being, whether that be for us in more of the administrative meetings, or whether that be for our kiddos in a classroom. We're also going to discuss mind-body connection strategies. We're going to introduce you and practice some together today too. That can actually help foster safe and supportive environments. And then also we'll end with some ways to just kind of, practically adapt these strategies into the classrooms. Again, if you all have a strategy that works really well for you all, the goal is not to try to say abandon all strategies and try these, but if these are some strategies that you might find helpful to try to integrate or bolster what you're already doing, then that's great. Next slide, please. Quickly, again, we have no disclosures. We're not getting paid by other entities to do this. We want to hopefully, we have no biases that we know of towards kind of what we're going to discuss today. Next slide, please. All right, so just like last time, there's always a little bit of a delay, but these slides and the recording is going to be sent to you. We're going to also make sure you have certificates of attendance after the series concludes. And as always, if you have more questions, please reach out to us at telehealthrocks@kmc.edu. And let's move on to the next one. All right. Thank you for bearing with us while we get through all of our housekeeping stuff. So we got some good fun news. The classroom resource books have been sent. So hooray, hopefully you received a blue envelope with the Telehealth Rocks logo on it and are, have been able to open those up and kind of peruse them. We also have a Facebook group, which we have, I think, currently 39 members. So I think that's pretty awesome. I know I've been trying to do my best to, keep on keeping on with our Welcoming Wednesdays, weekly fun facts, and just to try to create a supportive community. I also enabled the chat feature so you all can chat kind of part of the group too. Melissa and I are always there to kind of help moderate things too. If you would like to still be part of the group, you're more than welcome to scan the QR code here on the screen if you can see it. All you would do is you open up the camera feature on your phone and tap the big QR code as if you're going to take a picture of it. And then they'll send you to a website and that'll help connect you with Facebook if you want to go that route. We also are offering individual coaching, and some of you, I'm happy to say, are using that. And it's been really fun to meet with you all and kind of go over strategies, just kind of, the stressors that you're facing and trying to help find some ways, different ways to think about it or even implement some of the strategies that we're trying out here. So that's been fun for us to get to know more of you through that route, and that's still available if you want to try that out. Let's see, we're going to continue sending emails with resources, links, and tips. Hopefully you all got to try out the I Spy activity. And also I just want to say thank you so much for filling out our survey. There was the pre-survey, which it's completely anonymous to answer. We're not sharing answers with other people. By filling out that survey, which a lot of you did, like 40, 50 of you did, that actually is helping us improve what we're doing and keep on providing services like this for communities. So thank you for that. And as we go to the next slide, we have coming soon posters and short videos that'll be sent to you all. So the unveiling of the posters, these are going to be sent to you hopefully soon, of course, right? Just transit time, printing time, all that stuff factors in, but these will be on the way soon. So one of the things that we wanted to provide you all with was just kind of like a handy visual reminder of grounding. Grounding is one of the great go-to mind-body connection strategies. It works when you look at grounding and the research behind it, like people who have more anxiety or feelings of overwhelmingness, depressive symptoms, more just stress in general. Grounding is a great tip and skill to use kind of throughout our life daily. And so we have two different poster types. One is more of like seeing the different grounding stop signs or waypoints, kind of as if you're going down a road. And the other one is kind of what to do in stressful moments with this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 kind of countdown for younger audiences. Again, too, if we want to hear comments. So if these posters are not helpful, if there's things you like about them, not like about them, we definitely would love to hear feedback. We always appreciate feedback, so that way we can make it better the next time around too. All right, next slide, please. All right, and again, I just mentioned it, but these are the books. Hopefully some of them have been shipped to you all. I recently read through Alpha Breaths myself, and I love the alligator breaths, pretty fun stuff. So hopefully, in case you're kind of wondering what to look for, there will be a blue envelope arriving if it hasn't arrived already. The kind of the neat thing too to think about, like, even though you all got to select kind of what book that you wanted kind of for what age group, there's, I think it's neat to also think about how this provides like a shared narrative, right? And within our classrooms, we have a shared narrative. Maybe there's books we're reading together. Maybe it's just, it unites that community. And so I think kind of having a shared narrative in this sense too, it's just kind of building out a broader community for us all. All right, next slide, please. All right, so we're going to start today off with an exercise. No one has to get out of their seat, more of a thought exercise or visualization grounding component. So there's something called cognitive diffusion. And I know I always thought this was spelled wrong for the longest time, but it's how it's spelled. So cognitive diffusion. What it is like sometimes when there's a thought that comes into our head or a stress or some kind of, deadline looming, we can't gain distance from a thought or emotion or just kind of gain emotional distance from it. We kind of just focus on that thought or that feeling and go, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. So there's a thing called diffusion or grounding that's used a lot in acceptance and commitment therapy. And I use it a lot with people, which it's like a simple strategy to help kind of gain distance from that emotional reaction or from that thought. So another example too would be like, say if, anyone says like, don't think about the elephant, right? And all you can see is that elephant. Everyone says like, don't think about. I know now I'm really distracted by thinking about like a pink elephant specifically. But so, right, just like that pink elephant, that thought can pop into our head or that emotion can pop into our head and kind of take up all that cognitive space. And if that's taking up all of our cognitive space, right, it's really hard to focus on what we're trying to do or get something done within a time frame. And so if you think about for kiddos too, right, this thought, like this pink elephant popped into our head, it's really hard to figure out like, well, how do I stop thinking about it and focus back on the math homework or focus on what we're doing in the classroom. So this is one way to kind of separate or kind of hit like a reset button. All right, next slide, please. So this is something that you can do at home. You can modify it. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's more about just kind of trying things out, right, and seeing what works for you in that situation. So I'd invite you to sit comfortably in your chair or however it is that you're sitting. Just make sure it's comfortable. And go ahead now and let your eyes gently close, or go ahead and just, stare ahead at this leaf on a stream. And just take a couple of minutes or seconds, taking gentle breaths in and out. And as your eyes gently close, or as you stare ahead at the screen, just notice the sound and feel your own breath as you breathe in and out. And as you continue to breathe in and out, imagine that you're standing by the bank of a gently flowing stream, watching the water flow. Imagine feeling the ground beneath you, the sounds of water flowing past, and notice the way the stream looks as you watch it. And as you look at the water, imagine that there are leaves from trees, all different shapes, sizes, and colors, floating past on the stream. And you just stand or sit, watching these float on the stream. This is all you need to do for the time being. And as you watch the water flowing past, with all the different leaves of different shapes and sizes and colors, start to become aware of your thoughts, feelings, or sensations. And each time you notice a thought, feeling, or sensation, imagine placing that on a leaf and letting it float down the stream. Do this regardless of whether the thoughts, feelings, or sensations are positive or negative, pleasurable or painful. Even if they're the most wonderful thoughts, place them on a leaf and let them float by. And if your thoughts stop, just watch the stream and the leaves on the stream. sooner or later your thoughts will start up again. And just allow the stream to flow at its own rate. And just notice within yourself any urges to speed up or slow down the stream. And just let these thoughts be on the leaves. If a leaf gets stuck or won't go away, just let it hang around and just observe the experience. There's no need to force the leaf down the stream. Just let it move on at its own pace. If you find yourself getting caught up with feeling bored or impatient, it's okay to just acknowledge it. Or say if you notice your thoughts are drifting towards something else, that's okay. Just nudge those thoughts back to the leaf. And if it's a feeling of boredom that you feel, you can just say to yourself, here's a feeling of boredom. And then place those words on a leaf and let them float by. You're observing each experience and placing it on a leaf on the stream. And as you continue to breathe deeply in and out, if you notice yourself losing track, just bring yourself back to watching the leaves float down the stream. And as you continue to notice the stream, place any thoughts, feelings, or sensations on the leaves and let them gently float down the stream. And as you watch that leaf gently float down the stream, finally allow the image of the stream to dissolve. And as it dissolves, slowly bring your attention back to sitting in your chair, in this room. And go ahead and gently open your eyes and notice what you can see, what you hear, and what you feel. All right. So those of you who tried it out, thank you. I think there's lots of ways that, it doesn't have to be this long. It could even be a super shorter check-in with kiddos. But this is a great way, right, to kind of help bring us back to, to gain that distance from thoughts or feelings, or, just what we're going through in that moment, to kind of hit that reset button, and to make sure we're not going down a judgmental path towards thoughts too, right? Thoughts and emotions are just, they're kind of like our own alarm system to let us know that something's not quite right or something's bothering us, but they're not necessarily like a right or wrong thing, right? It's kind of like the weather. The weather just is. Maybe we wait 15 minutes, the weather's going to change. Next slide, please. So we have a word cloud, I believe. So how are you feeling right now? I believe there's a chat link to respond.
Sorry, I'm getting there, guys. I apologize. I'm having trouble with my mouse today, but I will get it to you in just 1 second.
Yay. It's like sometimes technology is like our own worst enemy. It's like, no.
There you go.
Yeah, well, I appreciate everyone's responses, and I know some are probably still trickling in too, but yeah, I think it's, for those of you who said comfortable, I'm glad that you feel comfortable, just even for all of your honesty too, in terms of just sharing how you feel. Again, like one of the fun facts I like to share is that the average adult only knows, how to name 3 emotions. So I think it's neat that we are well beyond 3 emotions with this, group. And April, I hear you. I'm so sorry you're interrupted by a staff member. I think it's right how we can all maybe even it's interesting to think about how we can all have the same experience and how we can still have all these different kind of emotional or thoughts, feelings, right, experiences too. So it sounds like for some of you, right, maybe there is a calm or relaxed, kind of sense or feeling comfortable or tired right now. And also too, I appreciate your honesty and whoever shared that they feel like they're drowning. And so definitely, or sad. And so I think this is a great space. We definitely, I know the team wants to support you however we can. So if those, feelings of sadness or drowning or something that is definitely, consistent, persistent, we want to help you however we can. And again, just thank you all for your honesty and sharing those feelings right now.
And Steph, if I can just jump in while we have this up on the screen or not. I think one of the pieces with the feelings check-in, and we talked about this a little bit last week, is this is such a good tool that can be used universally and in so many different spaces in so many different ways. And so this idea that when we ask someone to check in and then hear that we are sharing it collectively and then we're talking about it, we're actually doing a whole lot of things. But there's a lot of ways that this can be translated. I've seen administrators use this for professional development check-ins. I've seen teachers use this for classroom check-ins, and just thinking about all the ways that this can be really useful. So absolutely, having people, students self-identify as, how they're feeling, pointing to a word. If there's a poster on the wall, pointing, by the way, is usually pretty anonymous. And so a student can point without actually saying what the feeling is. I've seen teachers who post this on their wall and have students tap like a poster and tap where they're feeling, if the words are on a poster. And that's a great way, if you're in the classroom watching that, just to kind of do a real quick check-in of kind of who is walking into my classroom right now. And if everybody is tapping a lot of energy, very low pleasantness, then that gives you an idea of kind of how you might want to start the class, right? Also great tool to use for a transition if things start to kind of get a little wonky. Maybe there's an interruption, there's a fire alarm, kind of needing to come back into the classroom or into a space and kind of reconnecting and kind of coming back together. And again, lots and lots of different ways to use this. But as Stephanie was pointing out, I think sometimes we overestimate emotional literacy and the words that anybody has to define or describe their feelings. And so going back through and kind of practicing this on a regular basis is only good. It only helps expand our vocabulary. It just gets us, I think it helps us be better at identifying those feelings, even if we don't spend a lot of time unpacking it. And it doesn't have to turn into group therapy, right? It can turn into, thank you for sharing. We're glad you're here. And then kind of moving on. It does not have to be this huge time suck, which is one of the barriers I've heard from our school friends is, I just don't have the time to spend 20 minutes on this, and you don't have to. There's lots of ways to incorporate things like this into whatever space you're in ways that are quick, but then also you get that value out of it. Thanks,
I
Steph.
might just add in, I think that was so beautifully put. It does remind me, I think with kids too, we really see this range of emotions come up. So I think just like you have done, Stephanie, just saying, you may be comfortable, or you may be sad, or you may be relaxed right this moment, or really feel stressed. We're glad you're here. All those are a-okay, and we're glad you're here joining us. I think that it just reminds me it's the same with the youth we're working with.
All right, next slide, please. All right, so today's topic is all about creating safe and supportive environments. Which I think, as we mentioned before, you all are experts in your own classrooms, kind of in your communities, and we all know that you have tools that work, right? That you're able to maintain a safe and supportive environment. So again, our purpose is to kind of help bolster what you already are doing, and maybe offer some additional suggestions or kind of things to think about if you're at a point where you're like, I want to start changing some things. So again, just we want to recognize too that the school environment, it's a very, very real environment, and there's lots of contextual constraints placed on you, placed on kiddos, from society as a whole. So definitely with these kind of points that we'll go over too, right, something to kind of keep in mind is that we hear that there's lots of different contextual cultural factors going on. So definitely this is not a one size fits all approach. All right, next slide, please. All right, so I like to share this story because I think it's a great, just kind of, way to think about things a little bit differently. Like sometimes we can have so many different stressors, whether that be administrative stressors, whether that be social, like just within our own community stressors, or maybe in more of our environment of classrooms. And sometimes it can feel impossible to make a difference, right? Because of all that overwhelmingness, just kind of, like a wave coming over us. Two, right, just our ability to meet those specific stressors, right? Our capacity for stressors to handle stress, maybe as we, as well as we think we could, that can all fluctuate and depend on all those different stressors and factors too. And so there's a story where two people are walking down like miles of oceanfront, so the beach, and there's thousands of starfish that have been washed up by the tide. And as we know with the tide, right, the tide goes out and the starfish are now going to dry out and they're going to die because they, basically just kind of all end up on the shorefront at the same time. And so there's two people walking, one person, started reaching down every few steps and started to toss a starfish back into the water. After a while, the other person said, "There are so many, what you're doing doesn't make any difference." And the other person replied, "It makes a world of difference to the ones I pick up." So while we cannot prevent, right, the starfish from ending up on the shore and in the sun, and we cannot prevent the stressors that come up or how they impact us or impact our classrooms, we are in control of how we want to make a difference. And so doing so, right, we can help promote kind of within ourselves and within our classrooms that safe and supportive environment. Right, next slide.
And so when we think about creating that safe and supportive environment, it really comes down to culture, right? And so when we are talking about culture, we're talking about what it feels like when you're in a meeting or in your classroom or in your school. And one thing that I absolutely know to be true is that every school has its own unique culture. That culture can shift across classrooms. There are cafeterias that have a certain culture, or a library. And I know that you all know what I mean, where you just walk in and it has a certain feel about it. And that feeling, that culture really is defined by the values of the individuals in that context, but also the individuals who are shaping that context. And then also actions, right? So we have what we believe to be true, our values, what seems right, and then how we behave. And so if we're all in these different contexts, in all these different times and with all these different people, we think about this culture, I think it really comes down to us asking ourselves honestly, if when we're in a certain space, if we're in your office or in your administrator's office, if you're sitting in and waiting at the front desk, what does that feel like? And are we supporting a culture of well-being? And if not, what are we going to do about it? Or how can we better support a culture of well-being? Or in what ways are some places supporting that culture of well-being, but perhaps not others in your school and other places in your school? And then how can we think about sort of the small things that we can do to try to improve different spaces that we're working in and that we're living in? So if we go to the next slide, please, Christy. So this is an interactive slide. So that's your kind of heads up that it's coming. So when we think about the classroom context or the school context, and we think about what students need from teachers to succeed. So what do students need from the adults in a school community to succeed? So what comes to mind? What do you all think students need in the classroom, in the hallways, in the cafeteria to succeed? Structure. Christina, it's almost like you know exactly who I am. To feel supported, relationships, absolute feeling safety. There we go, April. Consistency, unconditional care, love. More on the consistency. Absolutely, acceptance. Several folks saying relationships, safe environment. Anybody else want to? Yeah, food, absolutely. So thinking about basic needs being met, laughter. I love that, Tyler. Absolutely, having fun. Knowing what to expect and a sense of care and stability from adults. Absolutely. Great thoughts here. Routine and consistency. Yep, so several folks coming back to that. So several themes that you all identified here. So what young people need from grownups in the school community, whether it's their teachers or their school counselor, their administrator, but certainly in the classroom, really needing grownups who give the time and attention and effort to teach what is expected, to model what is expected, to practice what is expected, and to revisit that over and over again. So kind of coming back to that question of, if a person is succeeding in this space, in this classroom, in the library, in the bathroom, what does it look like? How will I know that this young person is doing what they're supposed to be doing and getting what they're supposed to be getting out of this space? So kind of being very clear about those expectations. We spend a lot of time when we're looking at schools or really any kind of other context, talking about and thinking about how people are not meeting our expectations. We spend a lot of energy around this. Often what's going on is that we don't actually have clear expectations, or we have expectations that may be difficult or even impossible to reach in that context. And so if we can be really, really clear about what is expected, if we can assume positive intent, assume people are doing the best they can, and when they are not meeting expectations, teach and revisit and practice and model over and over again, that can be really valuable and helpful. Again, folks who model the expectations, model and then give feedback, who reinforce, so celebrate when even small parts of the expectation are met. So I think about kind of early on in the school year, kind of elementary school, our very young friends, so kindergartners, first, second graders, and just sometimes the absolute massacre that happens in the bathroom when a group of young friends goes in there, and then like you go in after and you're like, what happened here? Like, and just thinking like, okay, so how do we identify something that those friends did correctly in this space? And then can we reinforce that? Thanks for washing your hands. And focusing on that and reinforcing it, and then finding ways to revisit in a kind, supportive way, revisit the expectations that maybe they need a little bit more practice in reaching. Showing appreciation for effort, right? So even if it doesn't look the way that it's supposed to or sound the way that it's supposed to, acknowledging and celebrating when someone's really investing a lot of energy in trying to get there, and then responding consistently. So that's that consistent and predictable that you all talked about. And then trying to be calm and as empathic as possible when young people struggle. So going into a situation, recognizing that if we're defining our expectations well, right, that everyone should know what it looks like to succeed, but that we're always going to have some folks who get things really, really quickly, and some friends who need a little bit more time. And so that we have to kind of be able to respond to all those different spaces. So you absolutely kind of hit on all of those. The stability, the routine, and those kinds of pieces, knowing what you're getting into when you're a student walking into a space, and kind of having a good idea of what's going to happen when you're there. If we can go to the next slide, please, Christy. So my next question is, what do teachers need from their leaders to succeed? So what do our grownups in the school context need from their leaders to be successful? What does that look like? Support, Time. There's a good one. Structure and knowledge of expectations. Absolutely. Feedback, acknowledgement of work. Oh, here we go. Good job, friends. Clear and linear communication, transparency, good communication, working together, so that collaboration, work, sufficient staffing, safety, grace. Tyler for the win today, laughing and grace. I love those two. Trust, that's a big one, right? Trust, I don't know if anyone said it, but I always think of trust and then also respect, and that respect is a part of trust. Communication, collective care and supportive self-care. These are all really, really good responses. Oh, I like this one, a restorative approach to deal with conflict. I'm just going to extrapolate and say acknowledging that conflict happens, and that it's a real part of what happens when humans come together, and that we have to have a way to work through it, to get to the other side, that we can't go around it or pretend like it doesn't exist. But hopefully, as we're talking through kind of this slide before, kind of what do young people need from the grownups in the school context, and we think about what do grownups in the school context need from leadership, we're seeing that there's some alignment, right? That there's kind of the clear expectations, that there's consistent communication, that people know what is expected from them, that they're fairly certain that if they meet that expectation, that that's a good thing. And then also trust, the conflict, safety, and acknowledgement, and kind of I'm maybe kind of expanding on this, but kind of the good staffing. So an acknowledgement that when the resources are low, and that when we don't have enough time, money, staff, people, hours in the day, that expectations must necessarily shift, and that that's a part of it, acknowledging that. But absolutely, that these are all the things that studies across the board would acknowledge are important for grownups to not just feel safe, but be productive, and then also stay in school communities, right? That school leaders are carving out work expectations that can be completed, that school leaders are not overwhelming staff, that they're kind of carving out those doable chunks, that there's enough time and attention that leaders are putting into it to teach, model, practice, and give feedback around expectations. So just in the same way that we expect young people to kind of know those expectations, that if we are going to expect anybody in the school community to do something, that we need to start first with saying that expectation out loud, teaching what it looks like, what it sounds like, and then revisiting it over and over and over again, and kind of coming back to that, giving feedback for improvement. And so this idea that, feedback has become such a buzzword. And I think a part of it is in the feedback literature and the scholarship around actual, feedback and improvement. When we give feedback for improvement, we are giving information so that people can change something and actually improve. Otherwise, it's criticism, right? And so feedback is really around this idea that we can do something and we can change something to improve, and really the end game being improving. And so how are we shaping that feedback, and that goes in all different directions. And so again, really that we're turning that opportunity to learn that we're creating those opportunities to learn, that we're giving grace and space to try new things, to make mistakes, and that this happens in our classrooms in terms of how the grownups leading that context, what they do for young people in those spaces, and then also what leaders do for everybody in the school context, but especially with the grownups there. So we go to our next slide, Christy. And so the same things kind of exist in these spaces, and really this is what we consider to be psychological safety. And there's a lot of ways that we have talked about safety, and a lot of ways that other people have talked about safety. But when we talk about psychological safety, there is a substantial research backing around psychological safety. There is research showing how psychological safety or feelings of psychological safety are linked to all kinds of outcomes. So productivity, well-being, satisfaction, retention, quality of life, across the board, all kinds of different outcomes. And when we think about what psychological safety really is, it's the belief that someone will not be punished, negatively judged, or criticized when they speak up or admit to a shortcoming. It's about knowing when we need to say something, knowing what to say, knowing how to say it, and feeling like there is space to say it. And without that psychological safety, when we think that we might be punished or in some way be negatively impacted when we try something new and make a mistake, or when we share feedback that maybe isn't in line with what we think we should say, and when that happens and we are kind of punished for making those mistakes or sharing our perspective, things start to fall apart. So cliques develop, collaboration decreases, and productivity goes straight down. And we've seen this, right? We've seen this in different cultures that we've been in, perhaps in our school, perhaps in other spaces, that things just kind of start to fray at the ends, and eventually it all kind of falls apart. That psychological safety is really critical. And again, that lots and lots of research shows this in lots and lots of different kind of ways. And so the ways that we promote psychological safety are all the things that we just talked about. So consistent and predictable contexts for everybody, that to the maximum degree possible, we're doing what we can so that people know what to expect and that it's the same over and over and over again. Spaces and expectations are in a really, really good space when it's really boring, when it's really, really clear to the point that it's just really boring, that people know that in this space, this is what we do, and this is not what we do, and this is how we do it, and that the things that are expected are promoting that sense of psychological safety and well-being. Creating openness to feedback, absolutely. People are asking for feedback, so it's really kind of what I call like the spirit of quality improvement. So people are seeking feedback for improvement. They want to know what else they can do, and what I think is critical to kind of that spirit of QI, and it's kind of what Stephanie said about our desire for input on around the posters that she highlighted, is that if the ultimate goal, right, and as a shared goal, is for it to work, then we know that we have to get your feedback so that it will work, right? We're going to take our first shot and make an effort, but we know that we need input so that ultimately that it'll work. And so if it's not working, then none of us are winning. And so we need feedback for improvement. And that's really the kind of psychological safety that we're talking about in a context. That there's an emphasis on relationships. Several folks talked about relationships when it came to students and grownups in the classroom and other spaces. And that's true of the adults too. So intentionally creating that space for humans to human and to human with each other and other humans. And so focusing on that relationship piece, the laughter, the fun, right? We are social beings and we want to be around other people and to share that space. And it's part of what helps us be safe and to be productive and whole. Creating that space for making mistakes, that it's okay to make mistakes. The idea that if you're not making a mistake, then you're probably not being challenged. We, all make mistakes all the time. Sometimes we make little mistakes, sometimes we make big mistakes. And then what happens when we make a mistake? What happens when a grown-up makes a mistake in front of young people? What happens? And the young people are watching, and we can show them what that looks like. And again, recognizing that all of us are in different places with our journeys. It's always a learning opportunity, right? So this friend didn't do it wrong. This friend is still learning how to do this, right? And so kind of reframing it as, okay, well, we didn't quite get there today. We'll keep going at it tomorrow. We'll come back together and try it again, right? And kind of that ongoing learning kind of approach, and really modeling that it's not just okay to try something and to not get it perfectly right the first time, but that's actually that should be the norm, right? That we are setting up kind of spaces that we have to keep continuously working and trying things to improve all the time, forever and ever. There's no finish line. The race just keeps going. Chrissy, if we can go to the next slide, please. And so also recognizing that when we're talking about this psychological well-being, this psychological safety, that there's a lot in that's kind of now baked into or affecting our school context that's making psychological safety a real challenge, not just for young people, but also for the grown-ups in the school context, and also acknowledging that if the grown-ups in a school community don't feel psychologically safe, it's going to be really, really, really hard to make the school feel psychologically safe for anybody else. And that's just the bottom line of kind of how safety works. When the people in the area, in the community, in that context, who have the most power don't have the power and resources, if they don't feel safe, the likelihood that they're going to help and be able to help other people feel safe is very, very low. And there's a lot of things that are working against what we're doing right here in terms of these efforts to improve educator well-being. So administrative demand, challenging students' behavior, and what you all said, there's not enough time, right? There's not enough time to do all the things that need to be done every single day. And that can be really, really, really hard and really degrade these other efforts. And so kind of thinking about what then we can do, right? And what we can affect and what we can address. But just acknowledging that this kind of teacher well-being is not something a lot of time that folks in different contexts are investing in, but they should be. And they should be, and we all should be investing in this, not just because it's the right thing to do and because it aligns with many of our values, but also because from a very, very, very business kind of straightforward perspective, we are more productive when we are in spaces where well-being is valued. And so if what we want is highly effective classrooms, highly effective teachers, highly effective administrators, highly effective learners in our classroom, then we need to be supporting well-being across the board because it's the only way we're going to get there in the end. We can go to our next slide, Christy. And so what does this mean in terms of thinking about adapting support and safety for the classroom? And Steph, is this where I'm supposed to hand this over to you, I think?
I think the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this idea of thinking about buy-in. So how are we explaining expectations and really kind of pitching it and selling it? We talk about this a lot in terms of administrators getting staff buy-in for new initiatives, but thinking about this around culture and climate. Thinking about the potential value of a well-being assessment. So being really clear about how are we defining well-being? Are we all defining this in the same way? How are we kind of measuring this at baseline? How are we tracking it? How are we doing this around a check-in? What we absolutely know is that there's been a lot more conversation around young people and their well-being and doing these kinds of check-ins in the school context. It's really good for the grown-ups too. Across any kind of workplace context, professional context, it's really good to have these kind of regular check-ins. And it's a way to kind of get a sense of kind of where folks are right now and then monitor this in an ongoing way. Thinking about leadership. And so thinking about how we're evaluating our leaders, how we are giving them feedback, how we're giving leaders feedback for improvement, just like we expect from them. And thinking about hiring practices that really support well-being. And so how are leaders creating that space and creating that culture to prioritize well-being from day one? How is that, kind of cooked into the HR process around kind of how we hire people, bring people in, and also what it looks like when people leave, and how we're learning from friends who are leaving about what we could be doing better. And then also thinking about different ways that we can strengthen the infrastructure to really provide that support. So thinking about teaching teams, thinking about peer coaches, and really trying to prioritize as much as possible this idea of prevention. And so we talk a lot about the value of prevention, an ounce of prevention, kind of that frame. But what we know is that in terms of time and money investment, that prevention is always going to pay off. So if it's possible for us to try to get out ahead of something and create that structure and to really kind of build up the strength proactively beforehand, kind of in advance of something, then it's always going to pay off. So thinking about what that looks like in terms of that psychological safety and ways that we can strengthen that psychological safety in our spaces. We can go to the next slide.
All right. So kind of to lead off of from what Melissa was talking about too, like, if we're trying to figure out how to kind of just prioritize, or right, how we even kind of start this process of just kind of rearranging things. This is an activity called cleaning up your plate, and it can actually kind of be helpful for us to conceptualize, right, like what is on your responsibility plate. So if we think about responsibilities, let's step aside and think about maybe if you're going to go to a buffet, right, or you're going to go to a potluck. There's tons of food items out there on the table. I know for me personally, I want to prioritize the desserts because I like desserts. And so in terms of like how I structure my plate, right, I'm thinking about, even though it's a different priority, my priority is the dessert table of the potluck. I might stack my plate a certain way, or kind of go in with a plan of knowing like, okay, I know I need to eat some green stuff. I know I need to eat some protein stuff. And I also want to make sure I have my priority, which is the dessert, on this plate. So something to kind of think about is, even though it's not the same weight as, going to a potluck or a buffet, but thinking about, if you could visualize all your responsibilities on this plate and trying to figure out like, are there things, that day or that week that need to be prioritized, right? Or such that we need to make sure we have space on that plate for. Are the things that are on our plate truly our responsibilities, or are there things that we can delegate? Or are they other things that we took on for other people? And it's neither right nor wrong to take on other people's responsibilities, right? But be able to acknowledge and know like, oh, what does my plate consist of? Are there things that I could kind of, clean up or keep off of this plate for this day or for this week, and maybe bring more things over at a different time when maybe priorities shift slightly, or there's just less responsibilities or due dates coming up too. So I think this plate kind of metaphor is a nice visual way to kind of think about, okay, like what is on my plate for maybe school stuff? What does my at-home plate look like too? Because sometimes maybe depending on what your at-home responsibility plate looks like versus in the school might be different. They might coincide. So just another visual way to kind of think about what it is that we're saying. All right, next slide, please.
And I think, Chrissy, can you go back to the last slide? Sorry, I know Steph just said going forward. We're sending you all over the place. Cleaning up your plate. So just kind of to follow through on this analogy, I don't know how many of you all are familiar with Weight Watchers or kind of the other sort of weight fitness kinds of initiatives, but one of kind of the magical things that some of these efforts kind of try to encourage people to do is just to track. So just to write down, in Weight Watchers case, it's what you're eating, but then also the kind of activity, and just to write it down. And this is something that can absolutely, it's a very tangible kind of practice. You can do this just as a way, so if you feel like you're getting really overwhelmed and stuck, but you know that you're really busy, writing down what you're doing. So just I did this and then I did this. And it's one way that you can kind of build yourself up to feel like, wow, like I really am doing actually a whole lot of stuff. If you can add to it kind of time frames of, in 15-minute chunks of your day. So here's what I was doing at these different times. If you're honest and you can kind of take a deep breath and really look at it with an open to feedback and improvement kind of space. There's also sometimes that you might find that there are incredibly huge time sucks in your day that are just eating up a lot of that time that you have. And this is the kind of thing that if you are interested in reaching out to our group to kind of talk through and do some coaching, this kind of conversation is part of what we might be able to help with. We cannot create more time that we know of. We can't do that yet, but we may be able to help. And it's just always nice to have an impartial, friendly ear to kind of talk things through, to identify, okay, so here's something I'm trying. It's taking way, way too much time and it needs to be faster. What could happen? Because right now it's just taking so much of that time, and kind of just talking that through. If we can go to the next slide, Christy. And thank you. So the last piece in terms of application, and this is something that I would absolutely and have said to school leaders, but also would just kind of offer to you in terms of the work that you do, either with other grownups or in particular thinking about with youth, this idea of cognitive load. And it's the same idea with kind of what's on people's plate, what can we control, what can't we control. But I really like focusing on things that we can control. And this idea of cognitive load is one of the things that we can look at. So we think of types of cognitive load. There's these 3 different kinds. So this intrinsic Cognitive load, so the task difficulty, so how hard is a task. This is often something that in the moment we do not have any control over. So whether kind of an expectation is going to be easy for someone to meet or not easy to meet is often based on what's happened before that moment or will happen later. It's often not in the moment. So that's a tough one sometimes to control. Kind of this idea of germane cognitive load, so connecting the dots. So how does what I'm learning now connect to things in the past? This is something that we want to do to build a stronger brain architecture to make it easier to input more information. There are ways that we can help with that, help people build connections, give people time to build connections. But one of the things that we absolutely do have control over is this extraneous component. So what is the rest of the noise that's happening as we're trying to do something new? We're trying to teach new content. We're trying to help people learn how to do new things. And this extraneous noise is real, and often it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for students. It can be overwhelming for grown-ups. I think about a lot of professional development that I've attended or I've heard of or I've probably done, where the amount of extraneous cognitive load collapsed all of the learning effort because there was just too much going on, right? There's too much outside of the learning that it was just too distracting. And so there's lots of different things that we can do around this cognitive load piece. We can just be aware that it's a thing. I think a lot of times, especially I'm thinking like a basic, we're trying to teach someone how to do something. We teach it, and then when they can't do it right away or they can't do it in the amount of time that we expect them to, we think that there's something wrong, either with them or with us, right? Something didn't happen, it didn't work. But just being aware that there's other stuff that's happening, right? This is not a like direct one-to-one kind of linear relationship where, I say something and then it happens. That's not how this works. There's a lot of other stuff that's going on. It's helpful to make those connections explicit. So that idea of that germane cognitive load. So if things do connect, make it really explicit. Point to a calendar. If you learned some, if you're teaching a new concept, but it connects to something that was learned last week, point to it on a calendar. Talk about what you were wearing that day. Talk about it was really cold that day. Give kind of those context clues around that component. The last professional development, the professional development where we ate all of the Halloween candy, right? Give a little clue of kind of how it connects. Give time and space to process and connect. So as we're trying to either ourselves learn new things that are really tough or expecting others to, offering that information and that learning space and kind of giving some time to like breathe, mindfulness, right? Ground ourselves, let our brain do the work of helping the neurons connect and giving space to do that. Be purposeful, clear, and concise as much as possible. If you're not, entirely clear what your goal is for this part of the thing, this thing that you're teaching, or this thing that you're trying to help other people learn how to do, revisit what you're doing and make sure that goal makes a lot of sense. Be clear and concise. Use routine, as much as possible. We talked about that before, and name the feeling. So kind of one of the things that we can do, and we did it with the check-in, with the feelings, and then kind of talking about it with psychological safety, is just saying out loud, this is really hard. This feels really hard. Let's take a second and take some deep breaths so that we can all make sure that our brains are catching up, and just name it. Name it out loud. You don't have to have therapy. You don't have to talk through it. You don't have to process it, but just naming that this is really hard. This is tough to kind of connect, and putting that out there. So just a few ideas of kind of how this can apply kind of in different sort of situations, but specifically to the classroom and in offering that content. And with that, I think, Christy, I am sending it back to you. Or let's talk through key takeaways in our last few moments here. Kind of revisiting organization and classroom climate impact us all. Mind-body strategies can help us manage stress. And supporting ourselves and supporting students, that's the way that we can foster these safe and supportive environments that are really, really important. So now, Christy, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, everyone, today. Our next session will be December 1st from 12 to 1 p.m. and we look forward to seeing you then. We will be sending out the classroom posters for today's attendees, so you should have those before the end of the year. And if you have ideas for what else would make a great poster, let us know. You can email us at telehealthrocks@kumc.edu. Have a great day, everyone.